We want to welcome everybody to today's emergency webinar. Now is the time to break the silence. With Joe Kent's resignation from the Trump administration, it's now becoming increasingly clear that from within the establishment itself, there is increasing worry and dissension concerning the disastrous course of action that the United States and other nations find themselves on with respect to the war that no one seems to want, but nonetheless seems to be going on. There's a statement that was issued by presidential candidate Diane Sare, and it's called, "Is the Epstein class planning a new 9/11 to justify dropping a nuclear bomb? Will your neighbor be fooled again?" We're just going to read the opening paragraphs of that. We, the undersigned candidates for public office, call on the American people to act before the attempted regime change assault on Iran leads to irreversible consequences. We are now entering the third week of the illegal, unprovoked U.S. and Israeli attack on Iran, an attack launched without a declaration of war, without a congressional vote, and without a clearly defined objective. We do not know how many people have been killed or how much damage has been done because the censorship is unprecedented. We do know that it was an American Tomahawk missile that struck a girls' elementary school, killing 168 students and 14 teachers and staff. The United States government is admitting that 13 Americans have died so far. Both houses of Congress have failed the American people by refusing to uphold their constitutionally mandated duty under Article 1, Section 8, to determine whether or not to declare war. Every congressman who voted against enforcing the War Powers Resolution should be thrown out of office. And that statement has presently been signed by Diane Sare, who issued it, and co-signed by Jose Vega, independent and Democratic primary candidate for U.S. Congress from the 15th Congressional District, Bronx, New York, Brian McGinnis, Green Party candidate for U.S. Senate, North Carolina, Lieutenant Colonel retired Anthony Aguilar, Green Party candidate for U.S. Congress from the 13th Congressional District of North Carolina, Rob Rushkowski, write-in candidate for U.S. Congress in Georgia, 14th Congressional District, and Frankie Lozada, Democratic Party candidate for U.S. Congress, New York's 4th Congressional District. Now, what is emerging in the country, we hope, in time, is a grouping of people, of independent candidates for peace and development. And what we're here to do today is to let you all know that that guidon has been raised to be put on the hill so that other Americans, patriotic Americans who are against senseless wars and potential thermonuclear wars, have a place to gather and to act. So I'd like to first introduce Diane Sare, independent candidate for President of the United States. Diane?
Thank you. Thank you, Dennis. 50 years ago, an American maverick by the name of Lyndon LaRouche ran for U.S. president because he believed that Jimmy Carter, under the direction of the evil Zbigniew Brzezinski, was going to plunge the United States into thermonuclear war. Later, after the brutal assassination of Libya's Muammar Gaddafi, LaRouche warned that we were in the early phases of a new world war directed against Russia and China. He was correct. We are holding this press conference today because most people in the United States do not realize that we are heading towards self-annihilation. As you should recognize from the contents of the Epstein files, there is no limit to the depravity of the ruling billionaire elites who have taken over the government of the United States of America. And to be very clear, I don't just mean the Trump administration. Plenty of top Democratic Party officials, from Governor Bill Richardson to Hillary Clinton, have also been implicated. We're holding this press conference today in hopes that more people of courage will step forward, just as Joseph Kent, now the former director of the National Counterterrorism Center, did yesterday. He wrote, I cannot, in good conscience, support the ongoing war in Iran. Iran posed no imminent threat to our nation, and it is clear that we started this war due to pressure both from Israel and its powerful American lobby. As to be expected in a failing, collapsing empire, the perpetrators of these crimes and their worshipful lackeys are screeching and howling and denouncing Mr. Kent as a coward and a traitor, and I believe his life may be in danger. 2 weeks ago, members of both the House and Senate voted in a majority that they had no desire to fulfill their duties as outlined in Article 1, Section 8 of the United States Constitution, namely that it is their responsibility to declare war or not to declare war. As I watch the dangerous escalation with the inevitable cascading effects of the US and Israeli-directed military campaign against Iran, which I must also credit former British Prime Minister Tony Blair for directing, I racked my brain for what could be done to halt this runaway train before it flew off the rails into the abyss. Demonstrations, while important, have not been effective in changing the policy of a government, which is made up of people who believe, to this point apparently correctly, that they have no need to worry about what the people whom they are supposed to represent actually need or want. We have an election process which is rigged from top to bottom, and we have a billionaire class of satanically inspired perverts who delight in inflicting suffering, torture, and death on helpless victims. Then I thought about what Lieutenant Colonel Anthony Aguilar, who is with us today, accomplished by speaking out about what he witnessed during his brief employment with the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. He's here, so I will not tell you his story, except that his action led to the shutting down of that criminal killing operation, which was actually run under the orders of the IDF. How do we know that it was Aguilar's actions that caused that? Because US Ambassador to Israel, Mike Huckabee, spent 6 minutes in an interview with Tucker Carlson denouncing Tony Aguilar for being a liar and claiming absurdly that Aguilar was begging to get his job back with the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. I'm also joined here today by Coleen Rowley, who was an FBI agent at the time of the September 11th, 2001 terror attacks on our nation. She had the courage at the time to come forward and expose egregious intelligence failings, which made it possible for those attacks to occur. It must be remembered that the events of September 11th not only led to the deaths of nearly 3,000 Americans on that day, but also led to a quarter century of war, displacing tens of millions of people, killing millions of others, killing thousands of Americans, and creating a situation where we now have 22 soldier suicides per day in the United States. The fact that to this day, we still don't know the truth about what happened 25 years ago has left our republic a hollow shell of the vibrant beacon of hope we were to have been. It takes thousands of people to commit crimes and cover-ups of the massive scale we are now experiencing. Therefore, there are many people who know the truth. I don't believe that human beings are fundamentally evil. I believe that Americans have conscience. We are here to appeal to Americans of conscience to speak up and tell the truth about what is happening. 250 years ago, men and women of courage found the oppressive actions of the British Empire and the European oligarchical system to be unbearable. They were highly literate and familiar with the philosophical works of Plato, Cusa, and Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz, and they agreed that every human being is equally created in the image of the Creator. And a handful of geniuses like Alexander Hamilton, Benjamin Franklin, Gouverneur Morris, and others conspired to create a new form of government based on that principle. This government was based on the principle that the responsibility of the government is to protect the freedom of each individual to be able to develop his or her talent for the benefit of society and mankind as a whole. Today, 60% of the American people would be unable to understand the words in our Declaration of Independence, but it doesn't mean that the ideas within it, which are universal principles, are unfamiliar to their spirit. I believe that when the magnitude of the willful and destructive crimes of the Epstein class are brought to light, and I don't mean merely the horrific crimes committed against the children that they abused individually, but the crimes committed against entire groups of people, like the people of Gaza or the people of Ukraine, of whom 1.8 million are now dead because they were used in a proxy war against Russia. I believe when it is made known that all of this killing could have been avoided, and that much worse lies ahead if this policy is not stopped, the American people will make sure that it is stopped. So we're here today to demand that others, whatever your rank, whoever you are, wherever you are, who know some part of the crimes that have been committed by members of the US government, that you come forward now, because otherwise it is apparent there is no line which will not be crossed as we march toward our doom. Thank you.
Thank you, Diane. And if you have just joined us, we want to welcome you to today's emergency press conference and webinar. Now is time to break the silence. You just heard Diane Sare, independent candidate for the presidency of the United States. She's convened a group of candidates that have joined us today, and they've jointly issued a statement titled, "Is the Epstein Class Planning a New 9/11 to Justify Dropping a Nuclear Bomb? Will Your Neighbor Be Fooled Again?" We read a portion of that statement earlier. It just begins with saying, "We, the undersigned candidates for public office, call on the American people to act before the attempted regime change assault on Iran leads to irreversible consequences." And we will read a full list because actually it's been updated. There are additional people who've signed on to it. We'll make sure to get to that after we hear from our presenters. Our next speaker is retired Lieutenant Colonel Anthony Aguilar, Green Party candidate for U.S. Congress from the 13th Congressional District in North Carolina. Tony, welcome.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, you're very clear.
Thank you. So when Josephine Guilbeault, an 18-year veteran, started to speak out against the genocide, the administration called her a traitor. When I spoke out against the genocide and the complicity of the United States government in the genocide and what Israel is doing in Gaza, a 25-year veteran Green Beret and a Purple Heart recipient, I'm a traitor and a liar. When Brian McGinnis spoke out and said, "Do not send us to die for Israel," and his arm was broken for the world to see by a U.S. senator in the U.S. Senate committee hearing, he became a traitor. Joe Kent, a veteran, Green Beret, CIA agent, serving on the National Counterterrorism Center as its director, who has access to information and intelligence that the president cannot even begin to comprehend or understand himself. Now he's a traitor. Everyone that is speaking out against this deceit is automatically labeled as such by this administration. And that should be a very telling tale and a telling sign to the American people of where we are headed and what the administration is hiding. And to quote George Orwell, that in a time of deceit, truth becomes a revolutionary act. And we are simply acting on truth as our obligation and our duty. I think we can all agree that what we've seen from not only the authorities, the media, the institutions of this country that use propaganda and censorship and surveillance to cover the truth, yet the truth is still coming through. I call on every member of the United States military, regardless of your branch of service, from 4-star general or flag officer, admiral, down to private first class or the lowest ranking of your service. I call on everyone in the service to denounce this conflict because it is illegal, immoral, unethical, and I was just following orders is not a defense. I was just following orders will not save you from the gallows of justice. And for every officer, especially in the grades of general officer or flag officer, our admirals and our generals, General Dan Kane, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, who I served with, Admiral Brad Cooper, the commander of U.S. Central Command, whom I've served with. I'm calling on both of you to denounce this war and do what's right. And like Joe Kent and others, to speak the truth and stand up against this. As a call of action, I'm calling on every member of the armed services to conscientiously object to this conflict and do not participate. For anyone that's on the precipice of considering joining the military right now, do not join as a matter of protest, but a matter of standing up for what is right. There is no clearer time in our country where it is so obvious to all of us that the need for change is so needed. And the time for change is so perfect. We must make change, and it starts with us. It starts with action, not just words. The resignation of Joe, I think Joe Kent is going to send a message and others will follow suit. But if we do not take this opportunity to take further action, we are missing a monumental opportunity to make the change that we want. We must all be the change that we want to see, starting from me, from you, from any one of us sitting at home, whether you're in a position of authority or power or not. We are the change, and now is the time to act. Words only go so far. We must take action. So I call on everyone to take action in your own way, to vote in new members of our administration, from president to members of Congress that are not complicit and compromised, that want what is best for America, to stand up against this illegal, unjustified, immoral, unethical war, not to save yourself only, but to save our nation. I'm so thankful to have the opportunity to speak on the panel today, and once again to join everybody. And thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak, and I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tony. And if you've just joined us, we want to welcome you to today's emergency press conference and webinar. Now is the time to break silence. You just heard Lieutenant Colonel Anthony Aguilar, Green Party candidate for United States Congress, North Carolina, 13th Congressional District. And now this emergency virtual press conference and webinar was convened by Diane Sare, independent candidate for President of the United States. She and a group of candidates, congressional candidates primarily, have jointly issued a statement titled, "Is the Epstein Class Planning a New 9/11 to Justify Dropping a Nuclear Bomb? Will Your Neighbors Be Fooled Again?" We need people to distribute and circulate this statement right away, and it's available. We'll be also having some discussion in a few moments. So there'll be a little bit more information that will be given. Our next speaker is Coleen Rowley. Coleen is an American former FBI special agent and whistleblower. She's well known for testifying as to concerns regarding the FBI ignoring information of a suspected terrorist during 9/11, or prior to 9/11, I should say. That led to a 2-year investigation by the Department of Justice. And so we're happy to have her here. She also was, by the way, also an independent candidate for Congress, I believe. You might say something about that, Coleen, if I'm not mistaken. Was that 2006? Not certain when that was. Yes.
Yeah, that's correct. I actually ran as a Democrat, although now I'm an independent because I see both parties as being part of the war party, and they just ping pong off each other. So I'm an independent person now. Yeah, I've been at this for almost 25 years. And initially, when 9/11 happened, I too, like many people, was naive and could not even believe that all of these officials would attempt to cover up what had happened and the reasons why it had happened. Because, if you can't even tell the truth about something like this, it's going to repeat, and it's just going to get worse. So when I got a chance to speak out to the Joint Intelligence Committee, it did take 2 or 3 years. And they did have at least one finding that's very valuable that applies to what we're talking about today, which is information sharing. It's one of the main reasons why 9/11 happened. The CIA knew that 2 of the hijackers had come into California, and they kept their mouths shut for whatever nefarious reasons they had. They didn't even tell the FBI. They had been surveilling the hijackers for 2 years and didn't tell anyone. And so, this is why I began after this episode. And unfortunately, I have become more and more cynical. I was naive to begin with, but I have become more cynical because we see the corruption in the line having worsened over these 20-some years for these war profiteering agendas. And so anyway, I started to look into, ethical decision making. I gave talks on ethical decision making to at least 100 schools and colleges and professional groups, maybe more than that, for a period of years, trying to explain why would people cover up? Why would they lie about things afterwards? And the thing is, one of the titles I gave was Secrecy Kills. And this is exactly what we have right now, because until, Joseph Kent says, and others, there's a few others besides him saying that this was not, the war on Iran was not justified. It was a complete lie. And, the UK, there's somebody in the UK who was at the meeting with Oman when they were negotiating. And he said Witkoff and Jared Kushner were working for the Israelis. So, this is exactly what Joseph Kent is saying. We need more people to tell the truth about this stuff. Anyways, I did Secrecy Kills. A great article that I wrote with he was a FAA red team, and he had found out in the months before 9/11 that the airport security, you could get weapons in. He had smuggled, just as a red team, they had smuggled weapons in. He went to every level. He went to the head of the FAA. He went to Congress, he and his teammate. And he and I started talking afterwards because WikiLeaks occurred in about 2010. And we said, you know what? If there was a way to get information out with WikiLeaks, would you have gone when you were so desperate? Would the agents in Minnesota have gone when they knew that there was going to be a terrible terrorist attacks? Would they have gone public? If you know that these things are going to happen, and if anyone's interested, you can find our article. It did get thousands of views. It was called WikiLeaks and 9/11 What If? And the what if is if you share information with the public, and that isn't just my co-author and myself in the Los Angeles Times saying this. This is actually the finding of the 9/11 Commission, and it might be the most valuable finding, is if information was shared, not only inside agencies with each other, but also between agencies, and finally, with the public. With the public is maybe the biggest one. If the information is shared with the public, the 9/11 Commission itself said 9/11 could have been prevented. And so people don't think of this. They think, oh, you're a traitor if you tell something secret about the Gaza Humanitarian Relief Association, whatever it was called. You're the traitor because you told their secrets. It's just the opposite. It is completely the opposite. The only safety comes from the public knowing this information, and not only that, but our democracy. So, we had 5 or 6 senators recently who said, don't follow unlawful orders. When Tony we went through the list of people that have spoken out and have been called names. You forgot Mark Kelly, the astronaut. And, he was called every name in the book too. And he was called every name. actually do anything remarkable except say don't follow unlawful orders. That's incredible. We've gotten to such a serious point, a serious low point in our country right now, that just telling people, for instance, what if a Navy ship is given the order now, because Trump says it's so easy to sail through the Hormuz Strait. Why are you such cowards? Just give it a try. Take your ship with all of the naval personnel on it and give it a try. Sail through. And what if you were that commandant and you know, or admiral, and you know that, you know, my ship may go down, my sailors may drown, etc. Actually, there is some discussion that he would not have to follow that order. There's a duty to the ship, and there's some other things there, and I don't know the answer to that, but I would hope that admiral remembers Mark Kelly and the others' warning about not following unlawful orders, catastrophic orders that would lead to this. And the other example that we saw in history was the My Lai massacre. And there was a helicopter pilot, I think Navy helicopter pilot. He looked down, he sees women and children being lined up next to a ditch, and Cali giving an order to shoot them all. And if you can see these things, you then, again, have to have a conscience. You have to have a good conscience. As Joe Kent just said, you know, he can't continue on and keep his conscience. He will end up having a moral injury if he continues on in a genocide, and he can't speak out and whatever. And so that example is that there are people throughout history, Daniel Ellsberg, Hugh Thompson, the helicopter pilot, and others who have chosen to keep their conscience. And, you know, this is what we're calling for right now. Genocide is the worst thing in the world. And when Israel was conducting a genocide on Gaza, and now Israel has turned this genocide on Lebanon and on Iran. The United States may naively believe it was about regime change, but Israel wants a genocide. They want to destroy these countries, as Libya, as Syria, as all these, Iraq, all the Afghanistan. They have no interest in preserving a country. And in fact, they have admitted they want the greater Israel. The other thing that's been admitted here has been the fact that, and this is different from 9/11. At the time of 9/11, very few people knew this secret agenda, the project for the new American century, and the fact that they were going to launch a series of wars. It was all pre-planned. Very few people knew this, and very few people knew that they were looking for a quote-unquote new Pearl Harbor. I didn't know that. I mean, I knew some things, but I didn't know that. It's not secret anymore. We've had nearly 25 years of this. And so the people in government, the people in the military, the people in the intelligence agencies, actually, it's not very secret. They're calling for Armageddon. There are commanders at our military bases now claiming that Trump was anointed by God to start war in Iran in order to bring Armageddon. And I've kind of been facetiously writing on Facebook. I mean, I don't think even some of the so-called true believers want to meet Jesus this soon. They still want some more time on earth. It's not a real good selling point, but I'm just saying it puts us all on notice. It puts us on notice. And as Diane has just warned about a nuclear thermal, it could be as horrible as that. And again, that's what Armageddon is. So in conclusion here, I'll just go back to the Mark Twain question, which I tried to answer over and over in my ethical decision making. His question is, why is moral courage so rare, when more rare than physical courage? And, you know, I came up with some pretty good answers in my ethics talks about this. But the thing is, it's hard to lecture people to have them get a conscience. I know that. It has to come from within, and it has to be people who are in worried and seeing this, worried about their children, worried, for instance, as the Navy admiral would be about the people on his ship. It has to be people who are that worried that they now will speak out and go public and tell the truth about these things, because sharing information with the public is the only way that can curtail this. It's the only way.
Okay, well, thank you very much for that, Coleen. And if you've just joined us, we want to welcome you to today's emergency press conference and webinar. Now is the time to break the silence. That was Coleen Rowley, American former FBI special agent and whistleblower. We want to make sure to call your attention to a statement that was issued by these independent candidates, several of them, titled, "Is the Epstein class planning a new 9/11 to justify dropping a nuclear bomb? Will your neighbor be fooled again?" And that statement, just to go through the first sentence of that, says, "We, the undersigned candidates for public office, call on the American people to act before the attempted regime change assault on Iran leads to irreversible consequences." We have an updated list of the people that have co-signed that statement. I just want to read that in its entirety. Then we're going to go to questions. And also I'll ask if various of the panelists have something that they've heard they want to respond to. So the full list is Diane Sare, independent candidate for U.S. President 2028. Jose Vega, independent and Democratic primary candidate, not Democratic Party, for U.S. Congress, New York, 15th Congressional District. Brian McGinnis, Green Party candidate for U.S. Senate, North Carolina. Lieutenant Colonel retired Anthony Aguilar, Green Party candidate for U.S. Congress, North Carolina, 13th Congressional District. Rob Rushkowski, write-in candidate for U.S. Congress, Georgia, 14th Congressional District. Frankie Lozada, Democratic Party candidate for U.S. Congress, New York, 4th Congressional District. Steve Hill, independent candidate for Congress in California, 37th Congressional District. Lacey Villarreal, independent candidate for U.S. Congress, Florida, 8th Congressional District. Dave Bushaw, independent candidate for U.S. Congress, Iowa, 2nd Congressional District. Karen Ortiz, independent candidate for Congress, New York, 12th Congressional District. And Rustin Provence, independent candidate for Congress, Wisconsin's 3rd Congressional District. So that's the list as of now, and apparently it is growing as this is going on. Let me first just ask Diane if there's anything you'd like to say at this point, and then we'll open up and we'll go to questions. We'd like people, I guess, to raise their hands so that we can see them. I see one hand is up, so I'll go to that questioner. Just wanted to see if, Diane, you have anything.
I do. Excuse me. Can I be heard?
Yes,
Yes.
you can.
Okay. I appreciate both what Lieutenant Colonel Aguilar and Coleen Rowley said, and particularly beginning to get at it with this project for a new American century. I think there are two aspects that we're dealing with. What gives the normal person the power is speaking truth about what they have witnessed, as Tony Aguilar, who was not a billionaire, a reality TV host, or something else, coming forward, going to Congress, etc. There's also the importance of understanding the evil of the larger arc. And what I mean by that is, if you go back to Winston Churchill, this Project Unthinkable, where before World War II was even over, he was calling for a preemptive nuclear strike on the then Soviet Union. And we know from the writings of Fletcher Prouty that we were already bringing Nazi collaborators into American intelligence circles to prepare for a war against Russia in 1944, before VE Day. Now, I think this gets at why LaRouche, looking at Zbigniew Brzezinski, why was he saying that there is an intent for nuclear war? Because that has been an intention over a long arc, or to use the threat of nuclear war to establish a new world order, one world dictatorship. Bertrand Russell, the great so-called peace activist, actually said that one party had to control all of the nuclear weapons, all of the missiles, knowing that perhaps that's why it's perceived as such a threat that nations that are not in the Anglo-American elites like China or Iran or Brazil or South Africa or Pakistan get nuclear weapons. Also, I bring this up because most Americans, as I said, are not evil. So you kind of recoil in fear, or you don't want to go there, or you don't want to consider that someone would be so evil as to think of launching a nuclear war. But we have seen that. We heard it from Admiral Buchanan, who said at a CSIS conference just about a year ago that the important thing, if there were a nuclear war, is that the United States had enough weapons that we would still be hegemonic after it. So now you have not only people who are evil, but they are so illiterate that they believe that you can survive such a thing. So I just wanted to really underscore this, because we have to change the way we think. There has to be a new order of relations among nations. The BRICS process gives an example where the sovereignty of each nation is respected, and we abandon the idea that it's somehow human nature to be in this bell curve type competition where the only way you get ahead is by crushing someone else. That is not human nature. And I think that the founders of the United States 250 years ago, John Quincy Adams in particular, was clear on that point, and that we should resolve here that, and I think the candidates are with me, that the United States is going to actually grow into the role that we were supposed to be playing in the world, which we unfortunately are not playing right now.
Okay, thank you, Diane. Let's go to Paul Gallagher. Can we unmute him so we can ask this question?
I don't believe I'm muted, am I?
Okay, you're all right. We can hear you now. Very good.
Yeah. I have two questions. This is Paul Gallagher, Executive Intelligence Review. I have two questions, actually. First, with regard to the resignation of the National Counterterror Center Director, this is clearly a significant development, an important person, and Colonel Aguilar is calling on people to do more of the same. In general, on a broader basis, what will this do? What will it take to actually end this war? I know that's a very broad question, but I'm relating it to what this gentleman may have begun.
Okay, let's ask Tony to take that up first. Go ahead, please.
Well, as a military practitioner and a participant in every war the U.S. has fought in the last 25 years with my boots on the ground, wars conclude in one of two ways: termination or culmination. Culmination is when we, the good side, if you will, or our side, determines how and when the war will end. Termination is when a war ends because either you run out of resources, you lose the will to fight politically or morally, or you are defeated. The United States is on a course of termination in this war, and that it is no longer the United States' decision or condition setting as to how this war will end. This war will end when Iran decides it will end and how it will end. That is what most of America, well, every American should be deeply concerned about, because those conditions are not going to be easy to meet, nor will they be painless. We already know what Iran's conditions are to end this war. Every U.S. base and U.S. asset leaves the Middle East, Western Asia, and the Levant. That the United States and Israel no longer interfere or impede Iran's sovereignty in pursuit of ballistic missile defense or missile systems, and the pursuit of nuclear capability. And three, that the United States pay compensation for all of the damage caused in this war, but also compensation for the economic impacts of the last decade of sanctions. Those conditions are either impossible to meet or if met, will be devastating to the United States. So this war will continue until the United States is defeated and can no longer fight, not through culmination, but termination. People coming forward like a Joe Kent, who I've known for years, I've worked with. We were fellow Green Berets. We both served in the 1st Special Forces Regiment. I went through the qualification course with him. So, I mean, we've served together. So I know where he's coming from in terms of his stance now. My critique of it is that in the position that he is in the impactful position he's in, where was he 18 days ago before we started this war? Because right now, to come forward and denounce it is good from a moral standpoint, from a standpoint of making a statement. But we should have had more people in the administration coming forward and denouncing this through action, not just words, through action before this began or in the opening days of this beginning. Now, there is no one in this administration through negotiation, through special envoys or phone calls or back channels that can determine or have leverage to end this conflict. This conflict will end on Iran's terms. And that's what we have to pay attention to. What I foresee as a military practitioner, and I would welcome everybody to look, this isn't just me saying it. Lieutenant General Paul Ripper, Marine Corps Lieutenant General, in 2002, led something called Project Millennium Challenge. And he wore the red hat, or what I would say the adversarial hat, the hat of Iran, against all of the U.S. planners as the forces on what a war with Iran would look like. In nearly to the day, to the phase, to every aspect of what's happening, he outlined as what would happen. When I was in the Command and General Staff College at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, as a military planner, we did the exact same thing in looking at 2002's Millennium Challenge and looking at it from a 2016 perspective. And nearly every aspect was the same. The technology changed a little bit, but what we're seeing, Iran and their asymmetric warfare capability, it doesn't matter if we destroy their Navy. It doesn't matter if we destroy their Air Force. The real threat that Iran poses is in their will, their moral standing, and in their asymmetric capability. The United States is going to get deeper into this conflict. The United States is going to attempt to introduce ground troops, and it will fail. And then the United States will attempt to send in more ground forces to justify the loss of those ground troops. And I mean the 31st Marine Expeditionary Unit, and then forces from Iraq going into Iran. And then when that fails, the United States will be left with a perilous decision, much like the decision that Truman was faced with in World War II. And I fear that that day is coming, because I know that that day is coming. And I do not feel confident that this president and this administration have the aptitude, the education, the experience, or the patience, or the morality to make the right decision. We will see the use of a nuclear weapon before this war ends. And even then, it will end on Iran's terms, not ours. So what can we do here to stop it now? There's not much we can do to stop what's already happening, because once you kick the hornet's nest, the hornets decide when to stop. What we should be doing is that every American and service member who cares about their own skin or cares about this country should stand in defiance against this. If not only for their standing in history, but in hopes to bring this to an end sooner than prolonging it with more loss. So, at this point, I mean, the president of the United States himself could come out and denounce this conflict. And it still will not change the point that right now Iran holds the leverage, and this will not end on our terms. And we must come to accept that, and we must prepare for it. And we must demand change so that, one, it doesn't happen again, or that two, in the reparations of this war that we lose, the Epstein class is not putting themselves over the rest of America?
Paul, I think you may have a follow-up question, and we do have various other questions. Let me just say to people, if you have a question, you have to go to, I think there's a question option at the bottom of your screen at the right. If you don't see that, there'll be something with, I think, 3 dots. It says more. Press that, and question option will come up for you. And I just wanted to make a quick, brief comment, because of what Tony just said. You'll notice he said, even the use of a nuclear weapon will not change the terms of how this conflict ends. I want to just note that yesterday when Diane was speaking with Larry Johnson correctly pointed out that it was not the dropping of 2 nuclear weapons on Hiroshima and Nagasaki that ended the Second World War. That did not occur that way. It was the entry of the Soviet Union into the war, in combination with things that happened with the bombing. But the idea, and I just wanted to reference that because I don't want that to go by. I know, Coleen, you may also have something to say, but Paul, why don't you have another question?
I did. I think it's somewhat subsumed now, but in particular for Ms. Rowley, who became very well known at the time of the 9/11 attacks for insisting that there were tracks in advance of these attacks and that those tracks were not followed up by the intelligence agencies. So given the American people overall don't support the Iran war, according to the polls, and Israel doesn't seem to follow any U.S. plan, could there be a, quote, Iranian terrorist attack, unquote, in the process of being staged or prepared in order to try to get that support?
Well, I don't think it's so much the Iranians. Like, I don't agree with the fact that someone said, oh, they could maybe attack California. That's ludicrous. Someone mentioned sleeper cells, which was the same lie that came out after 9/11, which was never true. They rounded up 1,000 people in New York, and none of them had any terrorist connections. So this kind of propaganda is used. And it's used to demonize the Iran. It's not used as a valid threat or a valid intelligence warning. Now, what we have going on, we've already seen mass shootings, suicidal, homicidal. People are become unhinged. And in a wartime, it's like the 22 suicides of military people per day. When you feel hopeless and helpless, and I got to do something, but you don't know what to do, and you have access to a gun or a truck or a car or even a knife, and a lot of these people are not the thinking real clearly. They just say, this will solve my problems. Why do they think that going out and stabbing people will solve their problems if they can't get a date? I mean, it's because our government is from top down telling us this is how we solve problems. We go out and we commit a genocide. This Israeli method of looking at the world right now is causing all kinds of so-called homegrown terrorism. But it's not what you think it is. It's not from a foreign country as much as it is from people living here who are hopeless. And they're hopeless, and they're going to become more hopeless when the price of gas goes up and they lose their jobs and we can't get food. I just want to expand a little bit on Tony's point about what ends the war. I had the chance to get to know Daniel Ellsberg pretty well, and I read his books, and I saw his movie, his Academy Award-winning movie. And people forget, I was just a teenager at the end of Vietnam. It goes on for 10 years. Ellsberg beats himself up that he did not realize sooner how horribly disastrous it was. He goes into it thinking it's a good thing, and at some point he realizes, and then he and his friend start copying the Pentagon Papers. The Pentagon Papers did not end. Even when they finally got out, it took him 2 years just to find some way of releasing them. And then when they did get released, they didn't end the war. but what I'm going to use the term tipping point. When you reach a tipping point, and the Vietnam War has a lot in common with the current wars, the so-called endless perpetual war that began with 9/11. Although right now we're at 25 years and the Vietnam War only went 11-12. One thing is the costs of the war have to become apparent to people, the civilian population. And when you had a draft, it was military people were dying. Okay, people learned that and they started to oppose it. Then you had the Pentagon Papers being released and you found out that they had been lying. Finally, when Nixon overreacts and sends in plumbers to win his next election, he has his own, you know what? He had his own administration turning against him. John Dean was the White House counsel. I was talking with Diane about Joe Kent, and I said, well, if you get another John Dean that goes into Congress and says this is really what was going on, telling the truth, that wasn't the singular thing, but you add all those combinations of things together. And of course, also the war going bad. Trump is in a very similar position as Nixon. He's in a very similar position because already even some of his own base are asking, why did you promise us this and now you betrayed us? People like Tucker Carlson's being called a traitor and Trump is calling him. I mean, it's incredible. People who stood on the campaign stage with Trump Trump now has to call traitors. So I'm just saying that there's a lot of things that can come together that can create a massive swell, or what would be a tipping point inside the United States. Whistleblowing is part of it, but there's other things as well. And the costs, when the gas prices go up, right now our media is part of the problem. They're not telling us the truth. They come on every night and they tell people, oh, now gas is up to $5. Now it's up to $7. It may go up to $200. They never say why. I listen carefully and wait for this. Can you tell us why this is happening? Because the minute our media, the other moment, by the way, Cronkite in 68, when the media finally turns and says this war is unwinnable. It didn't end it right away, but you put all of those things together. And if our media starts to change, then I think we will have such a pressure on the administration that they will have to do what Tony said, which is give up on killing or regime change, whatever their goal is. They're not clear about it. Israel's goal is actually to destroy Iran and Lebanon. Their goal is to destroy it, just as they destroyed Gaza. That's Jared Kushner's goal too. He said we've destroyed Gaza. That was the goal to begin with. I don't know that everyone in the administration knows that that's the goal. And of course, when that danger increases on the United States and more cost to the U.S., there will be a tipping point.
Okay, thank you for that, Coleen. Now I'm going to read Diane, you want to say something?
Yes, if I might, because I do think, a very important Iranian leader who was just assassinated yesterday, Ali Larijani, who was the head of the Security Council, had warned of a possible false flag that would be blamed on Iran. And I think what Coleen is getting at, as you get to the price of gasoline going outrageously high, more Americans dying. We don't know if we're getting accurate figures on the number of American casualties. Will they be able to keep it a secret? When we get to a point where it's clear that the population not only opposes this, but overwhelmingly and vehemently and vociferously oppose it, would you then have an incident staged and blamed on Iran? Now, Larijani was warning about this, saying we would never do that. He was assassinated. But would that not be in the interest of the CIA? What about the Gulf of Tonkin or frankly, 9/11, which seemed to have a certain political effect that was desired? So it leads to questions about who was actually behind it. And I'm not saying I know the answer. I think we have to be honest and say we don't know the answer, but it was definitely not some guy with kidney failure in a cave in Afghanistan, namely Osama bin Laden. So I think that is a danger. And I was on with Scott Ritter a couple days ago. He said, thanks to independent media, he thought an attempted false flag would fail, that Americans would demand to know answers. That may be. I would prefer that we could preempt such an attempt from happening.
And I would also add that the statement itself would help to do that. Coleen, you want to respond? I think you're muted.
Iran claims that there's already been a false flag in that a bombing of Oman, they say they're not responsible for that. And they said it was a contractor hired by Israel. And Oman was actually part of the negotiations. It wouldn't make a lot of sense for Iran to be doing that. So there may well be already some false flags going on. And of course, this serves, it's just the opposite of what I was saying. If we get public opinion was already against the Iran war. It was almost like 60% of the United States was against it. But when rally around the flag starts, after we're involved, and if there are casualties on Americans, then you have that rally around the flag, and the opposition to war drops. And that's why these things they will try to do this to keep public opinion on the side of sustaining the war. Israel has been playing these games forever. They know how this is done. And don't be surprised.
Okay, I'm going to go next to Elizabeth Fletcher, and if she's there and she can unmute.
Hi, Dennis.
Hello.
Right. Hi, how are you?
Okay.
Mainstream media in the UK have no information from anyone except the government, and our military has no senior spokespeople that can or will speak out. I'm based near USAF, the United States Air Force, Fairford, which has suddenly been called RAF, Royal Air Force Fairford. And the bombers are there. They're being loaded with missiles and they're dispatched. And the press are telling people they're going to defend the UAE. So why have they got missiles on board? But our security services arrest anyone who speaks out. I believe it's similar across Europe. And what can we do? Because we are seeing that the United States is the aggressor in this war at the behest of Israel. And what can we do to join forces with you people who are trying to call it out?
Okay, Diane, I'm going to refer that to you.
Okay, I appreciate that. Please do circulate my statement, which I think people in the UK will find of interest. I also think, Tony Blair and Jonathan Powell, I have to say, are British cousins. Do we want to say that? Can play a very nasty role sometimes, like Jonathan Powell turned up in the middle of the last round of negotiations, I believe. And they also like to say, well, we got rid of slavery before you did, never admitting to the role they play. Tony Blair apparently inserted himself very early on with Kushner and Witkoff as some kind of advisor. So I think we, the people in the United States and the people in England, and should really unite against this Epstein class. They united across the pond, and we can unite to get rid of them.
Okay, very good. I see a few people have questions, other things. We're going to go to Jose Vega, who's one of the candidates that co-signed. I think he wanted to say something in response to that question. Jose, please.
Yeah, hi. First of all, I just want to say that yes, I am a proud co-signer of Diane's statement, and I am honored to be able to address everybody on this panel, including you, Coleen Rowley. I'm happy to see you here, and happy to see Diane and Tony Aguilar here. First of all, just on what people could be doing. Yes, circulating the statement for one. You know, we've been embarked here in the Bronx in a process of knocking on doors where we've knocked on over 17,000 doors to get my name on the ballot, but also to tell people the reason they should get my name on the ballot is because we do not want this war in Iran. And neither do they. Most of the people who signed do not want the war in Iran, and that they did not know that the person representing them was a supporter of the war in Iran. And so there's a lot of power right now when a lot of people are conscious about what is happening, and they see these things that are going on. They wonder, well, what do we do? Well, Diane just gave you some orders right there. She has a statement which has marching orders in it. And she's just saying, go to your local library, no matter where you are, and print some out and hand them out. Find some people to, hand it out with you. Organize some meetings and whatnot. And, just start talking to people and get them on to the various events that we do. The IPC, for example, is something that's done every Friday, moderated by Anastasia Battle and Helga Zaparush, one of the people who initiated it as well. So that's another thing that they can do. And if you're here in the United States, preferably if you're in the East Coast, you can work on my campaign, and then, if you're a little too far from that, you can make phone calls and phone bank for my campaign. And if you refuse to do that because you don't like me as a candidate, well, Diane Sare is the person that you can support. So that's my my response to that question. Dennis, I had a question too, but I can hold it if there's other stuff.
Well, let me just ask, do two things of a matter of business. By the way, there are many other candidates on here that you can support. That's the whole point of what the forum is. So that is the idea of our trying to expand, and that's the whole point of today's program and press conference. If Nadia Milleran, I think she had her hand up. I don't know if she's still there, but if she is there, we're going to give you an opportunity to say something. Jose, you can hold your question just for a moment, and we'll see if she comes up. And
Hi.
wow, you there?
Yes, I'm here, but I can't fix my video. I don't know how to.
Well, that's okay. Just go ahead with
Okay. I mean, I put my hand down because my question is, we are leaders in our congressional districts running for office, and what can we ask our constituents, the people who are voting, to do to impact this dire situation? I mean, what I heard being said is that we're going to come to a critical mass. It's going to take some years, it sounds like. How horrible. And then we would come to this critical mass by a variety of events and people standing up and people revealing information. And then we might, it seems like it's going to cost us a tremendous amount in the meantime. So I'm wondering if there's anything we can do really to evade that, or what we can ask our voters to do.
Well, I would like to actually take that up initially, even though I'm not supposed to. There's a prerogative of the moderator is going to now be exercised, because I think that's a really good question. And I think there's something important about what we're doing here today and what you see from what we're doing here today. People try to tell you that either you have the lesser of two evils or you've got to create a third party. And then people say, well, people aren't going to vote for a third party. And many of us who've been in that zone over the course of the last 5 decades know that that, in fact, is largely true. But there's something that we're capable of doing for the first time actually in history, in American history, but in history in general. It's not because of the internet, but it's because of the option that the internet gives us. And it's this. If you had a group of literate Americans that actually had read the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence and did realize that this is the 250th anniversary of the birth of the country, then that group of literate Americans could compel the country, just on the basis of conscience, to reenact the process that created the country in the first place. The battles were important, but they were not decisive. What created this country was a process of deliberation, of thinking, of discussion that went on actually for decades before the revolution and a decade after the revolution. The Philadelphia Continental Congresses and the convention in which the Declaration of Independence was ultimately signed required representatives. And what we're doing is we're taking a page out of what we were founded to do. And we're not, in other words, we're not just going to criticize who tried to do it 250 years ago, which I find, frankly, insufferably insipid when people do it. But what you're doing and what we're doing here is we're combining a tactic from the American Civil Rights Movement with something which used to exist called elections, when there used to be elections. And what we're trying to do is to create a sovereign electorate, not voters, a sovereign electorate. Now, that means people who think they're supposed to actually read, think, deliberate, discuss, and that it isn't simply that you vote. You have to act now. I mean, if you take Tony Aguilar seriously, then it means that really, particularly people, for example, in the colleges, what are they doing sitting at the colleges? You know, in the days of the Cuban racial crisis, I happen to have been around at that time. People were completely traumatized. I mean, we were trying to figure out because of course, when it's at that point, you wonder. But we're not at that point now. So the actions that have already been taken by people joining together here and beginning this process of discussion, we can accelerate the process. It does not have to take years. It's something that, in fact, can't take years. By dint of what Tony said, we're in a war already. And we're in a war which has an outcome which this government is not prepared to accept, and which other governments are prepared to instigate the opposite of by means of using the most powerful weapons that mankind has ever seen, which could easily, by the way, trigger an exchange with the largest other nuclear power in the world, namely Russia. And the notion that that won't happen is the dumbest idea that's out there. So I just wanted to say that what we are here doing, this forum itself, is an expression of something that 250 years ago demonstrated that it works. And our people are actually not stupid. The point is that the people are being indifferent. And if they see the candidate stand up as is happening, or Mr. Kent stand up as he did, yes, belatedly, I agree with Tony. But if they see that, then they will rally. Now, Diane,
for the next time that you gather, you have to have our faces up. You have to have our congressional districts, what we're running for. People need to be able to see the force of the human beings that are being activated, and they need to sign on to that. So it's, maybe we can add that the next time.
Sure. Absolutely. Diane?
Actually, I'd like to propose maybe we do that Monday. When I came to the idea of doing this press conference with Coleen and Tony, I was thinking, how do we pop loose more whistleblowers? Then, as I wrote the statement, it became clear to me that there is a candidates process. So in a sense, the two things were not conceived as a one, but it's coming together that way. And I really appreciate that, Nadia. And I'm thinking we had a meeting. What day was it last night? No, Monday night.
Monday.
Yes. Which, if you're available Monday night at 8 p.m., perhaps we should bring on all of the candidates who have signed on to this, who have a concern, and the candidates can organize. All of us have networks, presumably, to get our people on there. I did want to say two other things in response to your comments. One is, don't be surprised how quickly everything can fall apart. It's not going to be years. We don't have years. We have no redundancy. We saw that already in COVID. One bridge across the Mississippi going out, the entire United States is dislocated. So the price of gasoline goes to $8 a gallon. Things are going to change very quickly. And it's very important that you decided to step forward and take leadership, as did others. So that's the other thing. I think this does not have to be long. One last point, those of us running independent, we have to scandalize the election process. The fact that in New York, when I ran for US Senate, I'm still the only independent candidate who has successfully gotten on the ballot here in a statewide race because they made it impossible. I heard from Rob, who's on here, I think there's only 4 independents or something, whoever got on the ballot in Georgia through petitioning. Voters don't even know that you are disenfranchised before you get to the election place, because people cannot get on the ballot. And then when I turned in 70,000 signatures and got on the ballot, they would not include me in the debate. There was a Democrat, a Republican, and myself. That wasn't like, you could not argue there were 7,000 candidates and therefore we can't include Diane Sare. There were 3 people and they refused. And when I heard the debate, I saw why, because Kirsten Gillibrand and Mike Sapricone, the Republican, when the host said, "Do you propose there should be any limits on the use of the weapons we give to Israel?" And they both said, "Oh no, Israel is a little tiny country. They should be allowed to do whatever they want." And then when the host asked, if Donald Trump says that Ukraine must concede territory to get peace with Russia, would you support that? And both the Republican and the Democrat said, absolutely not. Ukraine must make no concessions. It was very clear why they didn't want me in the debate, but also voters don't know that. So we, the candidates, have a job to do, in a sense, to scandalize the process, because I think the voters might get very angry and they can organize their own debates. And they should organize debates and they should bring us in and let us speak. That's it.
Okay, we're going to go to Karen Ortiz, who is one of the signers on the statement. You can unmute and speak.
Hello, thank you so much for this opportunity to come together. And I thank Diane, Coleen, and Anthony. I just wanted to speak to the whistleblower aspect. You know, myself, I'm running as a progressive independent in New York 12, which is a super crowded race. And I am also being a lot of gatekeeping around debates, etc. But I found what's helping me break through not only to the constituents in New York 12, but to the press, is just being relentless. I was a whistleblower a year ago about Doge and what has happened at the EEOC, orchestrated by the authors of Project 2025. And I am just relentless. I will get anybody's ear and I will tell them what's going on. The thing that's enabled me to keep doing this a year later, because being a whistleblower can be very lonely, very isolating, is that I'm finding my own communities and other whistleblowers and other candidates across the country, including Nadia. Nadia and I and some of the other candidates are in another coalition together. And we support each other and we exchange strategies and tactics. And I was actually introduced to Diane and Jose over the summer at a town hall in the Bronx. So we have to look for our people, but we have to stay relentless. And you know, I've accepted that the change I am hoping to be a part of I might not see it in my lifetime, but I'm certainly going to help build that on-ramp for the next wave of congressional candidates. So I just wanted to add that a little bit of context and thank everyone for being in this space tonight.
And we want to thank you as well. Because of the issues of time, we're going to have to begin to wind down. I just want to reference that, Coleen, I think you might want to respond, you know, in the course of your final remarks to what she just said, what Karen just said. We're going to give Jose a chance to say a bit, and then we're going to ask any of the panelists if any final remarks you have, and then conclude. So, Jose?
Yeah, thank you. And also thank you, Karen. I do remember meeting you at the town hall, and it's great to see your race. I know it's crowded, and I hope you do pull through because all the candidates suck. And I'm not saying that because I know you. I mean that regardless. Sorry. First of all, this is going to be a tough question for Diane, who's my friend, and I don't mean to ask this in a hard way, but, you know, this is a press conference, and then this will relate to both Coleen and Tony. Diane, you know, on the issue of what Tulsi Gabbard has put out on that statement, you know, you were very harsh on her. You know, I've seen your statements on X calling her a sellout and whatnot. Now, what you intend to do in passing Glass-Steagall and other policies will make you very unpopular as well, Diane. And if you have somebody in your cabinet who chooses to resign over the fact that you want to implement something like Glass-Steagall or some other policy of, you know, for example, a national bank, you know, to what extent is that right for them to decide to resign because they disagree with your policy, as opposed to upholding a constitutional oath to support you, even if they vehemently disagree with you? Now, the second part to Tony and Coleen, I want to ask if you can talk to me more about the process at which you decided to break rank and say, you know what, I have to tell the truth. My superiors and the authority that I can appeal to is no longer enough to address the injustices that are going on, and I have to tell the public. So I hope those are two questions that, can add to people's final remarks.
Okay,
Shall I go ahead?
please.
I believe that what people are sworn to is not an individual, but to the Constitution. There is such a thing as chain of command, which becomes very important in war. I would not want to have people in my cabinet undercutting policies that I intended to implement. So if they vehemently disagreed with me, I would hope they would step forward, state their disagreement, and exit. I'm confident enough in the necessity of certain policies like bankrupting Wall Street, separating the banks, putting, maybe a 99% marginal tax on incomes that are over some set amount. I was thinking 24 million a year or whatever. These are tough policies. So if people don't want to stick to that, then let them go. I feel confident that I could defend my policies. There also is a possibility that a leader is not infallible, and perhaps there might be something where they had an insight that I had missed. This is one of the reasons why you really want to have debate, why I don't think people should be punished for changing their mind if the opinion that they come to is closer to the truth and closer to reality than the one that they left behind. And I think it takes a certain amount of courage to do that. But I think most Americans would respect a leader who admitted that they had been fooled. For example, if Donald Trump were to say, I was lied to by Pete Hegseth, Marco Rubio, Jared Kushner, Steve Witkoff, and Tony Blair, and I'm firing them and I'm changing the policy and we're stopping this right now. I don't expect that will happen, but I'm saying that such a thing actually would demonstrate leadership and courage in someone that we tend not to see much of these days.
Coleen?
Well, I have one of the thoughts I had, because there's such a lack of trust in candidates now. And that's rightly deserved, because most of our candidates, Trump is a glaring example, promised certain things and then completely flip-flopped. And he's not the first one. If you go back and see what they promise and say on a campaign, on the campaign platform, and then not even a year later, completely reversing themselves. Obama comes to mind after he said, and then he said, we'll surge in Afghanistan. We all voted for him thinking he was better than Hillary Clinton. So right now there's a problem of trust in the electoral process itself. And, many people say, well, we should just we shouldn't vote for a person who makes a promise, maybe an empty promise. We should vote on an issue and make it more like a referendum. In the state of Minnesota, we've only had one referendum, a state referendum in recent history, and it was on gay marriage. And you know what? You didn't have to trust the candidate. You got to vote yourself. Do you want gay marriage or not? That's what I think candidates should try to do when they put out their stances on the issues. Instead of calling them stances, they should make it more like, this is a hard referendum. And so that people can finally get some trust back in the whole electoral process. That's just I just want to mention one more thing. I guess this will be my final thing about the tipping point. It doesn't have to take as long as it did in Vietnam. In Minnesota, when Trump sicked the ICE agents, the thugs that were breaking down doors, breaking windows of cars, dragging pregnant women out, putting American citizens in detention, and then finally executing 2 American citizens, it didn't take 5 years. And so when this happens in a state, when people see it right close up, even our establishment, our judges, our federal district judges who were appointed by Trump were appalled. And so when these things happen and you can get that information out, it wasn't even 2 months. And in a month and a half, they had to pull out ICE out of Minnesota. Now, the rest of the people in the United States are plagued with it. But in Minnesota, they had to pull it out and they had to change the leaders, etc. So it can happen quickly. And when a tipping point, one characteristic of a tipping point is when it starts to snowball, it can happen very quickly. It doesn't necessarily take years and years. But you got to do something, and you got to make people understand what the consequences are to themselves, not just to the foreign area, to themselves. And when you make people understand the consequences to themselves, their families, their children, their grandchildren, everything can change almost overnight.
Thank you, Coleen. Tony?
I think most Americans, when we think about instances such as these or watershed moments in history, we think that they happened only when the U.S. got involved. World War I, we think that World War I started when the U.S. got involved, and that's not true. World War II happened when we invaded Normandy. World War II had been raging for years prior to that. And the conditions that set those things up for when it then affects us back here at home, as was stated, do happen quickly. But all of the indicators and all of the red flags, if you will, are present. The warnings, triggers, and indicators are all evident. And when it does happen, it will happen quickly. And we have a choice to do something about it now, when we can actually change it, or wait until it's too late. And then that change will require much more sacrifice from all of us, whereas we can use our process to change, or wait until the process no longer exists, and then that change comes through much costlier means. Now, Jose had asked the question about the process of coming to truth. And for me, it was not a process. It was an absolute. Truth is truth, right is right, in the time and the place of which you recognize it. For me, that came on the rubble and the remains of Gaza, in seeing the truth behind what our government, what was involved in at that time, but ripping down the curtain of what the United States government had been complicit and involved in, going all the way back from my entire lifetime, especially the time that I had joined the military. So for me, the analogy I can give is almost the yellow brick road in The Wizard of Oz, where Dorothy represents tenacity and hope, and the Scarecrow embodies intelligence and wisdom, and the Tin Man is compassion and heart, and the Lion represents courage and fortitude. All these things, that characteristics that I felt that I had in serving my country, until you see behind the curtain and you see the truth. And in that moment, you can acknowledge and accept it and do something about it, or continue to live in that lie. For me, that moment of truth, as I said, came in the rubble amidst the genocide of Gaza. And the truth was clear to me. And in weighing the truth, if you're sincere about the truth, if you're sincere about bringing the truth forward, it should not be a calculation of what suits me, what's the risk or benefit, how does this impact me down the road. None of that should matter. The truth should matter. In my case, when I came forward and spoke out against a genocide in Gaza, which further revealed more complicity, which gave me a shining light on what the United States has been involved in all the way back, again, since my entire adult life and my entire years of service in the military as being a lie for colonial empire, is that when I first came out and spoke, had I thought, man, my country that I served will turn and call me a traitor and a liar. Mike Huckabee would take the side of a traitor to our country, John Pollard, and champion him as a hero, but then turn around and call me a liar. Had I known all of that before I decided to speak the truth, I still would have. Because the consequences aren't important when it comes to, well, this is the truth or it's not. The truth stands alone. So to me, coming to that conclusion was not a process in terms of weighing risk and benefit or seeing one thing as opposed to compared to another. On my 25 years in the Army, I joined the Army at 17. I joined the Army before we were in the global war on terror. I joined the Army as a young, impressionable, patriotic American who didn't think that our country would be on the side of wrong. And every indication that I fought in war and everything that I was told in Afghanistan, in Syria, in Iraq, in Tajikistan, all given to me as the reasons of righteousness and justice. And until I saw that that was not the case, there wasn't a process of understanding. It was coming to the clear and concise, undeniable evidence of truth. And I'm sharing what I saw, the truth, that other Americans can see this who may not have the opportunity or the access and placement to see behind the curtain. I don't know if I'd not gone to Gaza and had seen it with my own eyes, if I would be this convinced and this passionate about the truth had I not seen it with my own eyes. Everyone's journey is different. And for me, that truth was not a process. It was an absolute revelation that now I am committed to speaking on, because the future of our country depends on Americans waking up and doing something about it.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that, Tony. Thank you for your service in this regard to your country. Diane?
Well, I want to thank both Tony and Coleen for their service. I want to thank the other candidates, because if you are running as an independent or a maverick upset candidate in either of the mainstream parties, it will be lonely, you will be attacked, and it's very important to be confident in what you know. I think it's interesting, this question of a tipping point, because we don't control, those of us here, how this war will go. We can't control what billions of other human beings on the planet are going to do, or leaders of other nations are going to do. But we know that a process has been set into motion, which is going to lead to cascading singularities, you could put it that way. And it is very likely there will come a time when people who are deaf to our words now will suddenly be hungry to know what we have to say. And that's why I think it's very urgent that we not only expose the evil, but we keep in mind the question also of the good and the commitment of the founders of our republic, who were explicitly clear against the evils of colonialism and slavery. Many of them, they didn't win out. And that's why they said that we had to perfect our union. They knew it wasn't perfect. So I think we should also take up that mantle, that we prepare ourselves in the event that this tipping point occurs, that we're not caught flat-footed, we're not behind, that we are prepared to enact the policies that are necessary to exactly ensure that mankind never finds itself in such a predicament again.
Coleen Rowley, Anthony Aguilar, Diane Sare, we want to thank you for being with us today. Also, Jose Vega, and several of the other persons that spoke who were candidates. Also, all of the people who signed the statement: Rustin Provence, Karen Ortiz, who we heard from, Dave Bushaw, Lacey Villarreal, Steve Hill, Frankie Lozada, Rob Ruskowski, Brian McGinnis. I think that's everybody that is on the statement as of right now. And You can, of course, be in touch. You can get more information concerning the statement that we read at the bottom of the screen here, and otherwise circulating that statement. Is the Epstein class planning a new 9/11 to justify dropping a nuclear bomb? Will your neighbor be fooled again? And I'd just like to say, in conclusion, the revelation of truth is instantaneous. So it is possible, not only that it doesn't take years or decades, but this can happen in a moment, in a twinkling of an eye. But you have to have a trumpet that sounds that's certain. And you can even raise the dead under those circumstances. So that's the way that we have to think. That's also the way that real Americans 250 years ago thought of what their destiny was, that they were greater than any destiny. They were not part of an empire. It's our job to stand on the side of that kind of world, the world that is spoken about in our Declaration of Independence. And that's what the people who have declared independence in these candidacies are asking all of you to do. I think that can be done, and I think it's something that we all need to get to work and do. So thank you very much for joining us, and that concludes today's emergency press conference.